Welcome to the debate. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast concrete urban plaza, just as the sun begins to set.
The best time of day in a city, really.
Exactly. The daytime commuters have dispersed, the rush hour traffic is, dying down. But rather than emptying out, the space undergoes this sudden, massive transformation.
Yeah, it happens almost instantly.
Within minutes, the square is filled not with just a handful of pedestrians, but with hundreds, sometimes literally thousands of people. And then music begins to echo off the surrounding high-rises.
That incredibly distinct blend of traditional melodies and modern pop bass lines.
You know it well. And the crowd, moving in this synchronized rhythm, transforms a static architectural feature into a vibrant, living organism. We are looking at the phenomenon of Chinese square dancing, or guangchang.
Right, a daily evening practice that has completely reshaped how public open areas are utilized across the country.
But with this transformation comes a profound civic friction. Today, we are exploring a central question. How do we balance the undeniable physical and social health benefits of this massive movement with the pervasive noise and disruption it brings to shared urban spaces?
It's a tough balance to strike.
It is. But I look at this phenomenon and I don't see a nuisance. Actually, I see an absolute triumph of accessible public health and cross-generational social cohesion.
And I look at the exact same squares, the exact same daily gatherings, and I see a situation where the sheer scale and volume of this practice constitutes a significant urban nuisance. I mean, it's a phenomenon that fundamentally monopolizes shared public spaces to the absolute detriment of the broader community.
Well, to really understand why I see this as a triumph, we have to look at the mechanics of what is actually happening in these public squares. And specifically, why it's happening right now.
Okay, lay it out.
We are talking about rapidly urbanizing environments. Over the last few decades, millions of people have transitioned from closely knit traditional village structures or low-rise alleyway neighborhoods into massive, anonymous high-rise apartment blocks.
Right, the classic urban isolation problem.
Exactly. In that environment, social isolation, especially for seniors, is a genuine crisis. It literally shortens lifespans. Square dancing is a direct, organic antidote to that.
Sure, I don't deny the health aspect.
But the genius of it is its radical inclusivity. The foundational choreography relies on really simple moves. Stepping left, stepping right, waving your arms, turning around. The barrier to entry is virtually zero.
You don't need a lot of coordination, I'll give you that.
You don't. You don't need an expensive gym membership, you don't need specialized gear, and you don't need to be inherently fit. For the grandmas and grandpas who make up the core demographic, this isn't just a cardiovascular workout.
It's a social lifeline.
It is a vital daily mechanism to combat isolation. It allows them to step out of a quiet apartment and instantly meet friends every single evening.
Yeah.
When we look at urban planning, the primary goal of a public square is to serve the community. If an activity provides such widespread joy, connection, and frankly, measurable health benefits to thousands of residents every single day, that shouldn't just be tolerated as a quirky hobby.
But hang on, it should be actively accommodated as the absolute highest and best use of civic infrastructure.
Okay, I hear the passion in that, and I certainly don't discount the cardiovascular or psychological benefits for the active participants.
Glad we agree on that.
We do. But when we evaluate the utility of public space, we cannot solely measure the benefits conferred upon the active users. We must rigorously examine the externalities imposed on everyone else.
Externalities like what? Well, we aren't talking about a small, quiet gathering of 10 friends stretching under a tree. We are talking about thousands of people occupying these squares every single day. And the critical mechanism here isn't just the physical presence.
You're going to bring up the music, aren't you?
Of course I am. It's the broadcasting of traditional and pop music at volumes that generate active, persistent complaints from the surrounding neighborhoods.
But cities are loud. People complain about everything.
When residents are explicitly telling their municipalities that the music is too loud, we are no longer talking about a benign, inclusive health initiative. We are talking about involuntary participation.
Involuntary participation is a bit strong, don't you think?
Not if you live there. If you live in an apartment overlooking that plaza, if you are a student trying to study, or a night shift worker trying to sleep, or if you simply want to use that public open area for a quiet evening walk, you are subjected to the sensory dominance of this one specific group.
Right, but
You use the phrase highest and best use of civic infrastructure. But when an activity dominates a space so thoroughly every single evening, it transitions from being a casual health benefit into an overwhelming territorial imposition. It effectively privatizes a public asset through sheer volume and mass.
oh, come on. You call it a territorial imposition and a monopoly, but to the average person, that just sounds like you're framing grandmas as an invading army rather than the very public the square was built for.
I'm not calling them an army, I'm just saying,
Let me offer a different lens here. Think of a bustling public market. If you have ever lived near a permanent outdoor market, you know the mechanics of it. It is loud, it is chaotic.
definitely.
There are vendors shouting, carts rattling over cobblestones, music playing from stalls, and thousands of people moving through the space. It leaves virtually no room for anyone who just wants to sit on a bench and read a book in silence.
That's true.
But we never call a market a territorial imposition. We accept it. We recognize that vibrant, active, and yes, noisy use of a public square is the very definition of a healthy civic space. We grant a total free pass to the noise of a market because we recognize that commerce requires friction and we value that economic nourishment.
Right, economic nourishment.
Exactly. But here we have square dancing, which provides immense physical and social nourishment. Why do we excuse the noise of capitalism as civic vibrancy, but view the organized gathering of citizens engaged in a joyful, health-promoting activity as an imposition? It seems to me this is the ultimate realization of what a public square is meant to be.
Okay, that is a clever analogy. But it completely falls apart when you look at the fundamental differences in zoning, utility, and predictability.
How so?
A market is specifically designated for commerce. It operates within a very specific framework of expected friction, usually during daytime hours, and often in spaces explicitly engineered for that flow of goods and people.
Squares are engineered for people too.
A general public open area, however, is zoned for multi-use. It is supposed to be accessible for diverse needs, which absolutely includes tranquility and decompression. Your market analogy actually highlights my exact concern.
Which is what?
A market displaces all other activities. If the dancers are turning a general-use square into a single-use outdoor dance hall every evening, they are displacing the teenagers who want to skateboard, the young families who want to teach their kid how to ride a bicycle, and the office workers who just want to sit and decompress after a 12-hour shift.
But are they really displacing other demographics or are they integrating them?
Well, let's look at how this activity has actually evolved on the ground. We aren't just talking about a spontaneous, casual gathering of seniors doing simple stretches anymore.
No, it's definitely grown.
What we are seeing in these squares now are highly organized teams. They are practicing meticulously choreographed routines for months to compete in citywide competitions. They have captains, they coordinate beautiful matching costumes.
Which is fantastic.
But this is a crucial pivot in the mechanics of the space. The moment you introduce months of practice for a competitive choreographed routine, you are elevating the activity from simple, inclusive public fitness to an exclusionary, professionalized spectacle.
Exclusionary?
Yes, it becomes a performance that demands a stage and an audience, and they are claiming the multi-use public square as that exclusive stage.
I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning. Because you are automatically equating organization with exclusion. Why does the fact that they strive for excellence somehow negate the public benefit?
Because it changes the nature of who can participate.
Not at all. You mentioned other demographics being displaced, but if you look at the actual trends, the demographics of the dancers are shifting entirely. Young people are now joining these groups in droves.
Well, some are, yes.
A lot are. They are looking at this practice, which used to be stereotyped exclusively for retirees, and they are deciding that it is actually cool, retro, and healthy. Think about the sociology of that for a second.
It is an interesting shift.
We have a generation of youth suffering from extreme digital fatigue,
burnout from the 996 work culture, working 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week, and severe digital isolation. They are actively seeking analog physical connection.
Yeah, they want to get off their phones.
Exactly. So we have this organic cultural phenomenon that is bridging a massive generational divide. You have 20-somethings and 70-somethings moving together, finding common ground in a shared physical space. That is the exact opposite of exclusionary.
Okay, but what about the competitive teams?
The fact that some teams take it a step further, donning beautiful costumes, structuring their practices, competing, that demonstrates a deeper form of civic pride and social engagement. They are building teamwork.
Right, but
The competition aspect doesn't erase the grandmothers doing the simple step left, step right moves in the back row. It simply adds a layer of depth, aspiration, and identity to the community. It proves the square is hosting a dynamic, evolving culture, not just a static, walled-off exercise class.
It's sociologically fascinating that the youth are joining in to escape digital burnout. I will grant you that. Cross-generational bonding is a rare and beautiful thing in modern cities.
Thank you.
But that actually brings up a logistical nightmare that you are totally glossing over.
Which is?
When you have 3 generations practicing a competitive routine together, they aren't just organically swaying to the music anymore. We have to look at the spatial mechanics of a choreographed routine.
Okay.
If a team of 50 or 100 people has practiced a routine for months, they require a rigid spatial footprint. They need the formation to hold. If I am a casual pedestrian, I cannot simply walk through their formation to get to the subway station without disrupting months of collective work.
So you walk around.
Therefore, the physical space they occupy becomes functionally invisibly walled off.
But people walk around temporary obstacles in cities all the time. That's just urban flow.
True, you can walk around a physical formation, you can avert your eyes from a brightly colored costume, but let's move beyond the physical space to the sensory space, because this is where the friction truly becomes unmanageable.
You mean the noise?
Yes. The core issue driving the civic tension here is auditory. Sound is omnidirectional and penetrative. We have to look at the architectural reality of these spaces.
Right, the high-rises.
These concrete plazas are usually surrounded by dense concrete and glass high-rises. This creates an amphitheater effect. The sound doesn't just dissipate, it bounces, travels upward, and amplifies.
It can get loud, sure.
When you have thousands of people gathered, the physical amplification required just to allow the dancers in the back row to hear the beat means the volume at the source speaker must be immense.
Well, they need to hear the rhythm.
And we need to talk about the psychology of rhythmic noise. This isn't the white noise of highway traffic, which the human brain is remarkably good at tuning out. This is a predictable 4/4 pop music bass line.
It is catchy.
Too catchy. Human pattern recognition makes it incredibly difficult for the brain to ignore a repetitive beat. So no matter the cross-generational bonding or the cardiovascular benefits down on the pavement, if the music fundamentally and involuntarily disrupts the psychological peace of thousands of people in the surrounding towers, it is a nuisance.
A nuisance?
It is an imposition of one group's joy onto another group's sanctuary.
Look, I completely sympathize with the resident in that apartment. Nobody wants a thumping bass line rattling their windows when they are trying to read or, put a toddler to sleep.
Exactly.
But let's look at the actual intention here, because intent matters in how we manage public policy. The core essence of this practice is joy, movement, and health. The noise is not the goal. It is a byproduct, it is an externality.
A very loud externality.
Sure, but modern cities are incredibly adept at managing externalities. We don't ban commercial aviation because airplanes are deafeningly loud. We create specific flight paths, we mandate noise curfews, we engineer better insulation. Society constantly manages sensory friction.
But what about the dancers?
Which brings us exactly to how municipalities are actually handling this on the ground. Cities haven't instituted blanket bans on square dancing. Instead, they have responded to these exact complaints by implementing targeted regulations.
Right, the volume rules.
They are establishing rules that mandate dancers must keep the volume to a reasonable level, often defining what hours they can operate. This is a brilliant municipal intervention.
I wouldn't call it brilliant.
Well,
If the city establishes enforceable rules that the volume must be kept at a reasonable, fair level, why doesn't that entirely solve the problem? It directly addresses the auditory friction you are so concerned about, while leaving the massive public health and social cohesion benefits completely intact. It seems to me that the civic ecosystem is functioning exactly as it should, adapting and compromising.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that regulation as a clean, functional solution. Let me explain why the mechanics of that compromise fall apart in reality.
Go ahead.
The concept of a reasonable volume, which these regulations often vaguely define as fair and not extreme, is conceptually flawed when applied to this specific phenomenon. Reasonable is inherently deeply subjective.
Is it though?
Absolutely. What is a fair volume for a group of 1,000 people trying to stay on beat in an outdoor environment? To achieve the necessary acoustic reach for the dancers on the periphery, the decibel level at the speaker must inherently exceed the ambient noise of the city.
Well, yes.
However, what is functionally necessary for the dancers is almost always going to be perceived as extreme to the parent putting that toddler to bed at 8 p.m. The friction isn't solved by slapping the word reasonable on a city ordinance, because the baseline requirement for broadcasting music across a vast open area every evening is inherently disruptive.
But it's a compromise.
When you mandate a fair volume, you are setting up a localized clash of rights. Who gets to decide what is fair on a Tuesday night? The dancer who needs the auditory cue to step left, or the resident who wants to hear the dialogue on their television?
I would argue that fair and not extreme is actually a perfectly viable compromise, precisely because it doesn't have to be subjective. We have acoustic metrics. We can measure decibels.
Meters aren't magic.
Municipalities can and do set specific decibel limits for public spaces, say 60 or 70 decibels at the property line. If the music stays below that threshold, it is legally and civically reasonable. Is it silent? No, of course not. But cities are not silent.
I'm not asking for silence.
The expectation of pristine, library-level quiet in a dense, shared urban environment overlooking a major public square is, frankly, an unrealistic expectation of urban living. By enforcing a reasonable decibel limit, the city is communicating two vital things.
Which are?
To the residents, it says, we hear your complaints, we validate your need for rest, and we will prevent extreme disruption. Simultaneously, to the dancers, it says, your physical health, your joy, and your community bonds are vital, and you have a legitimate right to utilize this space.
It sounds good on paper.
It demonstrates that complex urban friction doesn't require zero-sum solutions. We do not have to choose between the grandmother's cardiovascular health and the neighbor's peace. We can manage it with simple, enforceable metrics.
But are they actually enforceable?
What we are seeing is that these communities are actively engaging in this compromise. They are adjusting their speakers, purchasing directional sound equipment, following the curfews, and continuing to dance. That shows a remarkably high level of civic functionality, not dysfunction.
I agree that cities are not silent, and anyone expecting absolute tranquility in a metropolis is going to be disappointed. But again, there is a vast qualitative difference between the ambient, chaotic, unpatterned noise of urban life and the relentless, rhythmic broadcasting of a bass track for 2 solid hours every single evening.
Even if it's under the decibel limit?
Yes, even if a decibel meter registers the volume as technically below a legal threshold of 70 decibels, the psychological impact of that involuntary repetitive noise exposure is profound. You can't just point to a decibel meter and tell a stressed resident that their headache is mathematically invalid.
Well,
And we absolutely must look at the enforcement mechanism of these rules. A city can write a beautifully balanced ordinance saying the volume must be capped at 65 decibels, but who is enforcing that on a random Thursday night at 7:30 p.m. across hundreds of squares simultaneously?
the police, city management.
The logistical reality of policing the volume of thousands of independent, highly motivated dance groups is staggering. City authorities do not have the manpower to stand in every plaza with a sound meter.
Fair point.
So while the regulation sounds like a perfect, objective compromise in a city council meeting, in practice, it places the burden of continuous negotiation and confrontation squarely on the residents and the dancers. It forces them into a daily localized conflict over the volume knob.
I think you are severely underestimating the capacity for self-regulation within these specific communities. You pointed out earlier how highly organized these groups are, right?
They are very organized, yes.
That they practice for months, they coordinate outfits, they compete. Well, that exact level of intense organization requires leadership. It requires hierarchy.
True.
You have team captains, you have committee leaders, you have active WeChat groups managing the logistics. When a city issues a rule about decibel limits and operating hours, they aren't trying to police a chaotic, formless mob.
No, they're policing the leaders.
Exactly. They are communicating directly with team leaders who have a massive vested interest in maintaining their access to the square. If the municipal rule is keep it under this decibel level, cut it off at 9 p.m., or you lose your permit to use the space, that organized structure is highly capable of self-policing. The captains turn the volume down because they want to dance again tomorrow.
That relies heavily on the goodwill of leaders who are under pressure from their own back rows to turn it up so they can hear the beat.
It relies on mutual self-interest, which is the bedrock of civic society. But furthermore, let's zoom out and look at the ultimate macro-level trade-off here.
Okay, let's zoom out.
Even if there is some residual annoyance, even if the baseline is slightly audible in the apartments above despite the regulations, we have to weigh that minor localized friction against the catastrophic public health costs of an isolated, sedentary, aging population.
The health costs are significant, yes.
We are talking about preventing millions of seniors from suffering physical decline, severe depression, and hospitalization. The medical and social infrastructure costs of caring for an isolated aging population would absolutely dwarf the municipal effort required to mediate a few noise disputes.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Square dancing is a preventative health intervention on a scale that no government in the world could ever afford to fund, staff, or implement from the top down. It is organic, it is free, and the data shows it works.
That is undeniably a powerful point regarding the preventative health economics. I certainly do not dispute the catastrophic societal costs of an isolated sedentary population.
It's a huge burden.
It is. If this grassroots practices is indeed keeping millions of people out of the hospital, keeping their joints moving, and keeping them socially engaged, the macro-level benefits to the healthcare system are indeed staggering.
Exactly.
However, we cannot simply brush aside the localized cost to the immediate community as just residual annoyance. Chronic noise exposure has its own well-documented public health costs.
Like what?
Elevated cortisol, sleep disruption, hypertension. We have to ask if there are alternative spatial solutions that don't pit physical health against mental health.
What kind of alternatives?
If this is truly a vital, non-negotiable public health initiative, perhaps it shouldn't be relegated to general-use public squares, where it creates this intense acoustic friction. Perhaps modern urban planning needs to evolve to create dedicated, acoustically designed spaces for this exact activity.
Like a stadium?
Like a skate park. We build dedicated enclosed skate parks because skateboarding is loud and damages concrete. We build enclosed sports arenas. By relying entirely on general open areas, we are forcing a single space to serve fundamentally conflicting masters.
But that defeats the whole...
Wait, hear me out. The current situation, even with the brilliant inclusion of younger generations and the well-intentioned implementation of volume regulations, remains a highly precarious balancing act. The sheer daily volume of people and sound fundamentally alters the nature of the shared urban environment, transforming a multi-use public asset into a highly specific, dominant staging ground.
I hear your point about dedicated infrastructure, but pulling these people out of the vibrant center of the city and putting them in an enclosed acoustic bunker somewhere fundamentally defeats the purpose of community visibility.
Does it?
Absolutely. To pull my thoughts together, I look at the evidence and I maintain that Chinese square dancing is a vital, joyful, and necessary public health practice. Its true power lies precisely in its grassroots accessibility. The simple moves that allow anyone, from isolated grandpas to burnt-out youth, to step into a public square, meet friends, and improve their well-being every evening.
And the spectacle?
While the evolution into competitive, choreographed routines adds a layer of spectacle, it ultimately deepens that cross-generational social cohesion. The sensory friction it creates in dense cities is very real, but it is entirely manageable. By establishing metrics and rules that mandate a fair, measurable volume, cities can preserve this massive, organic health movement while respecting the broader community. It proves that active, dynamic, and sometimes slightly messy use of a public square is exactly what a thriving society looks like.
In parsing through my perspective, while I fully acknowledge the remarkable health, social, and even economic benefits for the participants and the healthcare system at large, we simply cannot ignore the severe externalities imposed on the surrounding community.
The noise.
The massive scale of thousands of people gathering every day, combined with the penetrative auditory footprint of broadcasted music in concrete environments, inherently monopolizes shared public spaces. When an activity forces involuntary, rhythmic noise participation on residents in their own homes, it crosses the line from public utility to territorial imposition.
Even with rules in place?
Especially since subjective regulations requiring a reasonable volume are incredibly difficult to enforce on a nightly basis and often fail to address the unique psychological disruption of repetitive beats. The practice requires careful, ongoing scrutiny and perhaps entirely new dedicated infrastructure to truly protect the multi-use sanctuary nature of our urban spaces.
Well, I think we have uncovered some vital points of convergence today. We clearly both agree on the genuine, quantifiable health and social benefits this practice provides, specifically its incredible ability to combat the modern crisis of urban isolation.
Without a doubt.
And we both seem to agree that the concept of a reasonable volume and how we architect our cities to handle sound is the absolute crucial pivot point for coexistence, even if we deeply disagree on how successfully that standard can be enforced right now.
Exactly. Analyzing this specific phenomenon illuminates a much broader, universal challenge in modern urban planning. We are constantly trying to balance active, dynamic, community health initiatives, which are inherently loud, take up space, and require friction, with the fundamental necessity of urban peace, quiet, and multi-use accessibility.
It's a moving target.
It is. It shows us that as demographics shift and cultural practices evolve from the ground up, our physical infrastructure and our civic rules have to scramble to adapt alongside them.
There is certainly much more to explore regarding how cities around the world manage the complex, often messy reality of public space and competing civic needs.
Absolutely.
We leave it to you, the listener, to wave a balance between public vitality and public tranquility. Next time you imagine walking into that vast urban plaza at dusk, hearing the echo of music and seeing thousands of people moving in unison, ask yourself, are you witnessing the ultimate triumph of community health or the overwhelming dominance of a shared civic sanctuary? Thank you for joining us.